Okay. Do I look like I'm in there?
You're in there.
I lowered it and I'm angling it up a little
Better light.
so that I don't have the,
Oh.
so that Debbie has to look at me. She can't hide behind the camera anymore. All right. All right, well, so we are moving out. This is the last week's notes, obviously. Remember last week we had the sending of the 12, we had the beheading of John, and then we had the return of the 12. I want to add just a few things because the imagery of bread and food continues in this next section. We're going to be doing Mark 6:30 through 44, which is the feeding of the 5,000. But obviously meal is an important part. This story leads us into the next. And remember, we have, of course, the 12 sent out with no bread, right? We get the feast of unlimited, the world's bread. And then we get the apostles come back and they are hungry. Because it's quite fascinating when they get back. All right, the apostles returned. Jesus told them all that they told Jesus all that they had done and taught. And he said, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So they're tired. All right, so that's an important thing. So first of all, just a few things. Notice on 30, verse 30, it says, the apostles. This is the first time that Mark calls them by that name, the apostles. Remember when they were, the same word is used more as a verb, and that Jesus sent them, all right? All right, so they went out, or Jesus called the 12. So Mark, going back to verse 7, he called the 12 and began to apostolize them. All right, in other words, he sent them. But when we get to verse 30, it's now not the 12, but the apostles. Because it's not just to have the gifting, right? You have to have the doing. In other words, if you're, you want to be a teacher, you have to do what? Teach. If you have the gift of healing and you aren't praying for people, you're not a healer, are you? But if you have the gift of healing and you're praying for people, you are what? A healer. Now, God's the one who heals and everything, but you're somebody operating in the gift. If you have the gift of prophecy and you're not prophesying, right? If you're, the point being that the name change, the apostles are described as now the apostles because what did they do? They went. And they're actually doing the ministry. Now, they go into it also, this section of scripture reminds us that doing this ministry is dangerous work. Because ultimately, what happens to the forerunner of the apostles? Jailed and killed. Okay, so the scriptures are telling us you are being sent, and it's all dangerous. The work God is giving you to do is dangerous in the world. Now, fortunately, we're not back in their day, right? Or if God called you to, Saudi Arabia or, another country where it's illegal to proselytize. And he calls people there, by the way. There are missionaries in all nations where it's forbidden to be a Christian or to proselytize, and Christian missionaries are there. And they recognize what? The danger, but that's part of the call. Jesus says, pick up your death device, your torture chamber. Pick up your torture chamber and that which is going to kill you, your electric chair, and come follow me. Because that's what, when we hear, see, the problem is we hear cross and we think of this wonderful Christian image. We don't think of it as an electric chair. An electric chair that works very inefficiently and causes a lot of pain before it finishes you off. So this section is telling us what? You want the name of Christian? Then be a Christ-like person. You get the name by doing, all right? You're not saved by doing, but you're called to be a follower, a doer. You're called to bear Christ to the world, and it doesn't matter if you suffer. I mean, it matters. That's the wrong word. Suffering will come. All right. If you are strong in your faith, you may not be invited to every family event, or you might push friends away, right? Or people may say nasty things about you on Facebook. Fortunately, you're not going to get arrested and killed right now, but those days are coming. They always return. Amen. By the way, the church is strongest when she's being persecuted. She's much stronger. You know why? Because the only people left in the church under persecution are the doers. The sayers that say they're Christian, as soon as the fire comes, the real Christians keep on doing. The cultural pseudo-Christians do what? I'm going to shut my mouth and hide in my house, So they evidence that they're not doers of the word. Okay. All right, so now that can move us on to verse 30. We're at, are we on class 23 or 24? Well, we're doing 6:30 to 44. All right, and so this is the feeding of the 5,000. And what you're going to see here is we're still getting a revelation of who Jesus is. All right? Remember, part of Mark's goals is, remember we have all these questions. Who is this? How does he get this? Right? Where's this authority come from? Who can calm the wind and the waves? Who? Because Mark is drawing his audience into what? He's answering the question. Who is this Jesus? All right. So we have the apostles. We'll start at verse 30. The apostles returned, and Jesus told them, and they told him all that they had done. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." Now, very interesting. He pulls them away to do what? Rest. Normally, that would be associated with Sabbath. But Sabbath isn't mentioned here, is it? So this seems to be something in addition to it. And so one of the things to recognize is that ministry is draining. So as you are called and you go do ministry, you need to recognize it will ultimately drain you. Does that make sense? There's the experience of being ministered to and the experience of ministering are two different things. All right? So like you will go... You do the healing weekend. Those people who are serving on the healing weekend, praying for people, will come out of the healing weekend exhausted. Those people being prayed for will come out of the weekend just full of energy and fire and enthusiasm and all this. But if those who are doing it all are what? Tired because when you're pouring out. It tires you, and the need then is to recognize, Jesus recognizes that his apostles need what? Need a little retreat time, right? A little retreat time. This is why it's okay, sometimes we've got to turn off the Martha brain and turn on the Mary brain and find those times of rest, Otherwise, we break down in ministry. When you hear about ministry failures, you hear there's recently one of the big pastors out there, long-time teacher, apparently had a moral failure, and everybody's, Almost all moral failures are because ultimately the person didn't rest, and then they start breaking down, and then they become vulnerable, and they become not the person who they were, So we have to find time to rest. Okay. So it goes on, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure to eat. All right. So they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Okay, so basically they got out of town. So they're in an area without a large population. Now many saw them going and recognized them. Now that's very interesting. Many saw who? Them. Right. In other words, by them doing all the work that Jesus was doing, now it's not, people aren't looking for one person, they're looking for who? That's one of them. So you see how Jesus' ministry is now multiplied. When we walk out the lives of ministry, we multiply encounters with Christ, because they'll encounter Christ through who? Through our work. Okay. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when he went ashore, he saw the great crowd and had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, the disciples came to him. Okay. So first of all, they're coming and going. This, by the way, the feeding of 5,000 is one of the few stories that's in all four Gospels. If it's in all four Gospels, that means it's central, it's big, it's key. Okay, where are we in? The wilderness. All right, so when we hear wilderness, that should bring us into the mindset of the wilderness experience of who? Israel. All this is pointing to who Jesus is by pointing to, believe it or not, the Exodus. Okay? So, for example, and when we can conflate the other Gospels, I don't remember which ones are which, but it talks about in the other Gospels, they all sat on green grass. Green grass puts it in a particular season. By the way, it also indicates there were witnesses that are writing these things. Green grass means they're early in the growing season, which means it's time of Passover. Okay, so one of the things to recognize in all of this is we're talking about, we're in the season of Passover. People are coming and going. What did you do during Passover? Many people did pilgrimages, to where? To the temple. So people are traveling. All right, green grass, we've got a lot of travelers. So what are some other indicators of Passover? All right, one is Jesus sees the crowds who come out to see him. He has compassion, and he says they are like what? A sheep without a shepherd. Okay. So this, if you look at Numbers 25, verse 15 and 19, well, I got to print it on this page. This is, Moses is getting ready, all right, he's been the shepherd, and we're going to get a transfer to who? Who's going to take over for Moses? Way back in the Exodus period. Joshua. Joshua. How do you say Joshua in Hebrew? Yeshua. Which is, no, Jesus' name is Yeshua. It's a variation of Joshua. All right. Before this, Moses spoke to God and said, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits and of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, and shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep with no shepherd." This is Numbers chapter 27, verse 15 to 19. So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Yeshua and I'll put my spirit upon him." And he's going to be the one who ultimately, Joshua is the one who's going to do what? Take them into the promised land. The other areas where we read in the various prophets is that Israel, we get the prophecies that they're not being shepherded by their leaders properly. All right. And that comes in other areas. So we got green grass, we have travelers, and we have this allusion to the transfer from Moses to who? To Joshua. So we're talking about the exile. All right. What initiated the final effect of the exile? So if we think about it, we're in Egypt. Right? And eventually we're going to be where? In Israel. Okay? What got them in this first jump? Because remember, the last plague was
Death of the firstborn.
death of the firstborn. All right? So we get what? Death of firstborn. However, how did God save Israel? How did they not die?
The death angel came and put
Blood
Blood on the
blood on the
doors.
doorpost.
So they had to sacrifice what? A lamb. By the way, could they sacrifice any old lamb?
No.
Oh, it has to be a perfect lamb. Okay.
That's right.
All right. Then 3, we got the blood, right? And the blood went over what? Above and along the sides to cover. That means, so in other words, to pass over from death, you have to go through a door that is what? Blood. You see how all this is foreshadowing? You see how this is why you've got to have the Old Testament. This is all, none of this, Jesus makes no sense without this. Okay. So they go into the Passover, the angel of death comes over, all right, and we get the death of the firstborn, but Israel is saved, right? They get saved into the wilderness. Okay, in the wilderness, they're hungry. How do they get fed?
God.
Okay, so we get bread from where? From heaven. All right, coming down, and that bread sustains them while Moses leads them as a shepherd. All right, what was Moses doing when he was called? If we go back to the burning bush,
He was a shepherd.
shepherding the flock. All right, who's considered the great shepherd? Okay, so we got. Again, bread imagery, and then we'll ultimately get the final crossover into what? The Promised Land. Okay, and that takes place with who? Joshua, which is equal to Yeshua, who is the what? The new shepherd of Israel. Or of God's people. Okay. So in the initiation of this, so they're in the wilderness, what do we need? We need something to eat. Jesus, by the way, has compassion. And his compassion, by the way, is to do what for them? What's the first thing he does with them?
Provides a need.
He teaches them. So what's the number one need? What do they need more than even the food?
Knowledge.
They need the Word of God. And he is the Word of God. So he begins to teach them many things, and he teaches them a long time. Now remember, what's happening to the poor disciples? They haven't been able to do what all this time? Now they maybe have gotten some rest on the boat journey, and hopefully they got a snack on the row over, I don't know. But the imagery of being sent without bread, but God provides, right, means for them while they're in their wilderness journey, they come back. Jesus brings them into the wilderness to do what? That they would find rest, which is a Sabbath imagery. Who is ultimately the Sabbath for all humanity? Where do we ultimately get rest from God, with God? Through Jesus. He is the Lord of the Sabbath, all right? They go to the place. Ultimately, he says, hey, the disciples are like, get rid of all these folks, right? And he says, what? You feed them. Okay. You give them something to eat. And they said to them, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And they found out, and they said 5 and 2 fish. So basically, he's like, well, how much, what do you all have for lunch? And of course, in the other gospel stories, we get the boy. I can't remember if that's the feeding of the 4,000, though. I'll have to go back and double check. Well, it's right here. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. All right. There's a lot of conversation about the 5 and the 2. All right. And most of that's subjective. You got the 5 could represent what? When we look at the Bible, 5 is often associated with the Torah.
Yeah,
5 books of the Torah. All right. What would represent the 2? So as Christians, we might say, oh, that's the 2 natures of God, or the 2 natures of Christ, right? God and man. How much bread is left over? 12 baskets representing the fullness of God's people, right? All tribes of Israel are included. Those are all still very subjective. Ultimately, what we have here is we get the 5 and 2 fish. He commanded them to sit down in groups by hundreds and fifties, and taking up 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. All right. So first of all, this is important, I think, for the church. The church has a call to do what? Preach the word, help people, feed the poor. We got the full gambit of what God's people are supposed to do. And then we look at our budget, and what do we think? We got 5 loaves and 2 fish, and then we think what? Well, we'll cut ministry. We believe we can only do what the bank account tells us to do, which tells us we have faith in what? The materialistic realm, and we don't trust God. So we lack faith, and our lack of faith causes what? Lack of ministry. We do this personally. We do this as a church, not just St. Mary Magdalene. I'm talking about the church falls into this level of sin. Now notice, Jesus doesn't say, doesn't say don't take an accounting, right? He says what? How much do you have? So we need to know how much is in what? How much is in the bank account, right? What are our resources? But what's the call? So in this case, the church, represented by the apostles, has 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's their resources. But what is their call? What is Jesus telling them to do? Feed everybody. Right? This is what's in our bank account, Jesus. And what's he saying? You have to feed all these people. So the bank account doesn't meet the what? The call or the ministry. Now we got to be careful to listen to what God is telling us to do. There are sometimes we may be trying to do things he doesn't want us to do. All right? But if he calls us to do something, our job is to say, this is how much we have, this is what you've called to, and then who fills the gap? We have to and that takes what? Faith. Because if we don't have faith, what do we do? What does Israel do when they don't think they have enough to make it? They don't think they can beat the giants. They don't have water. They don't have this and that. What are they always trying to do? Okay, we're done with this mission, God. Let's have a new mission.
We get it.
Right?
Back there.
Right? So, okay. So this is an important key here. It's good. We need to take an accounting of what we have, but we also need to know what he's telling us to do, sometimes very specifically. And if if the 2 don't match, we have to have faith to trust that who's going to. Right? This is true of individual ministry too. Do I have in of myself as a human being the power to heal somebody? Nope.
So is the message
But I need to
sit
pray.
and wait, or is the
No,
for
you.
the faith, or is it
Well,
the
you-
message to act, to push forward?
I
and
think
do
the message is to keep following through with what Jesus is telling you to do, which means handing out the food. And of course, what does Jesus do? Even though you hand out your 5 loaves, that's it. That's the call. Give your 5 loaves and then trust that God will have to do the rest. And no offense, this should be very liberating. Because you know who it falls on then? Well, it's your problem now, God. Sorry, that sounded flippant, but okay. So, so they sit down on the green grass. They take the loaf. By the way, what are the loaves made of? Barley. Why? Barley, by the way, indicates Passover. You know why? Because the barley crop comes in early. The wheat crop comes in late. And so usually the bread you were eating around Passover was what? Barley, because that's what's coming in at that particular time period, you know. So it's interesting. Okay. So Jesus does something he's going to also then do where? So we're looking to the past. We're looking at Passover and the wilderness experience, but he's now also doing something that he's going to do in the future. When does Jesus take bread, bless it, and break it? At the Last Supper. What's he doing at the Last Supper? He's actually initiating a new covenant. This is my blood of the new covenant. All right? This was the initiation of the old covenant, right? Under Moses. Now we're getting the initiation of the new covenant. Jesus is saying, who? I am what? I'm the shepherd, but I'm a superior shepherd than the ones who came before you. This is why I do these things that I do. Okay. Which is one of these miracles. So he goes, he breaks, blesses, and gave it to the disciples who set it before the people. All right. And there's always debate, all right, where did the multiplication happen? I like the idea that he broke these small things out and they each had a little bit and they had to start handing it out, and then it happens in their hands. Now, I have there's a wonderful story. It was in Juarez, Mexico. It was a group of charismatic Catholics who were trying to help the poor people in a dump, and one of their prophets said, I think we're supposed to go there on Christmas and give them a Christmas dinner. Right? So this small group of charismatic Catholics went to this dump where people are living in the dump, and the people in the dump would look for recycles and then give it to the recycling companies, and they were able to eat, I think they said 4 days out of they made enough to eat for 4 days or a couple days out of the week. The rest of their food was the garbage. And their children couldn't learn, they were malnourished, blah, 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 blah. So I'll never forget the story, because the one guy was a dentist. These are all normal people. I'm listening to their interview. One was a dentist, one was they get there and they had 2 hams, 150 tamales, and a certain number of oranges. That was over 400 people showed up. And the 400 people were in 2 separate gangs that hated one another. Now they have a problem. They have how much? They have 5 loaves and 2 fish. They have a possibility when the food runs out that they're going to end up with a war, right? But they also knew very specifically God told them to do this. He told them to do it. And so what did they do? They brokered a peace agreement, they set up the table, and they just started handing out food. And to me, the dentist was the funniest, because he was handing out slices of ham, and he talked about how he'd cut the ham, he'd put it on somebody's plate, and he'd look, and there's the ham, and it just never changed sizes. He kept putting it on a plate and did it, and ultimately all 400 people were fed. All right, this happened probably in the 80s, and guess what they had left over? They had food, 2 hams, and oranges and tamales left over that they were able to donate to an orphanage. So that's recognizing the call If he tells you to do something and you look and you think, well, I don't have the resources, doesn't matter. If he tells you to do it, we have to what? We have to do it. We have to do it and trust him to do the rest. Even if it fails,